So tonight, the Ukrainians attacked Moscow with 144 drones, according to TASS reporting. Well, let me correct this. They did not attack Moscow with 144 drones. They attacked Russia with 144 drones. Some of those went to Moscow. And apparently, at least one was a hit. And you could see that from the images we saw that it might have been some intention to cause panic, and just like previous attacks on commercial centers, this one hit a residential area in one of the outer rings of Moscow. And of course, Ukraine had given up on these tactics some time ago, but now it resorted to them again. And I really don't get it, because previously those had only galvanized the Russians. They only rallied the Russians around his president, only solidified the government. So I don't really get what do they gain by attacking civilian buildings, high apartment buildings, because you can understand that one thing in war is collateral damage, where you bomb certain industrial areas, or you bomb certain civilian facilities that are being used to store manufactories of weapons, or to store weapons of some kind undercover. And then of course around you have civilian buildings and facilities, and they get splashed a lot of times by the air defense. But this was not the case, so I don't really know what were their targets. Of course, the formidable, I should say, Russian air defense deflected the big majority. The only casualties reported was a woman who lived in one of these apartments, and there are several wounded, but so far reported only one dead. What in this story I should point out is the increasing in the number of drones. 144 drones. I think it's the biggest attack so far, the biggest drone attack so far. Of course, I suspect that when Ukraine does such things, it's how should I say? All these attacks that Ukraine does, they are orchestrated by Western sponsors, right? So indeed, this is another step for escalation. And if they're gonna supply Ukraine with long-range missiles, so they can do this kind of things, actually I have to give some credit to Scott Ritter's opinion when he says that we are closer than ever to Third World War. And many of you, of the more ignorant, the ones that don't look back in history far enough, think that this is all Russia to blame. Why did they get in the territory of Ukraine? But in fact, all this escalation started since the moment of the US that the US started meddling in internal affairs of Ukraine, which eventually led to the coup in 2014. All the steps that the West has taken, those are the ones that have been unjustified. All the steps that the NATO and the Western powers have taken towards the Russian border, those were the unjustified aggressions, not this is the narrative that plays in the West, that Russia has to be punished for its unjustified aggression, which couldn't be more silly. And just by sheer logic, you should be suspicious of it. And the escalation and the aggression has been taking place on behalf of the West. All the increasing NATO presence on Russia's borders, unjustified. Russia always had a diplomatic approach, and a friendly approach, I should say, and building ties and economic ties and other ties with Western countries. And they were just waiting, they were just provoking and waiting for that time when Russia would do something more aggressive, so they could lay every blame on Russia, blame it for everything, escalate maximum they could, maximum sanctions, and what we are seeing right now. Again, I do not wish to sanctify a part and demonize the other, but facts are facts, and the US foreign policy is US and UK's foreign policy is the main responsible for the state of affairs in geopolitics concerning this conflict and others. Because the narrative says that Russia must be contained, but a country that has a record of aggressions, invasions, pillaging, killing, financing, coups, dictatorships, I mean, you name it. Very dark record is the US. And a lot of times participation of EU countries as well. So it's up to you to choose between this very basic Russophobia, which is a product of propaganda, or to see the sequence of facts that led to the situation today. It's funny how the US now keeps accusing Russia of meddling in their elections. It's even funnier how their news outlets interpret and spew out their so-called news. When you read these texts of these accusations, it's the playbook of the Americans depicted there. Whatever they are accusing the Russians of doing now, it's their playbook. They go in full detail and it's their playbook. And many times they accuse Russians or Russian-related people of things that are not even crimes. It's they are doing attacks on freedom of speech, because no one said that it's forbidden to think differently, and so to have different narratives from the single narrative that you are allowed only in the West nowadays. And so this also mirrors a lot of the accusations that, for example, are done against Russia about the lack of freedoms. Of course, concerning freedoms, I think no country is innocent in the world whatsoever. Whenever you have powers that be, those powers have always mechanisms of perpetuating themselves in power, and therefore, even if you have the purest of democracy, you will have at least a slight level of repression. Sometimes justified, sometimes not. In the case of Russia, I think all the repression that is being made in the West, from banning news outlets to banning artists and whatever comes out of Russia, it's sheer Dark Ages or NAZI mentality. It's not more than that. It's very basic, and it does not belong in democracies, that kind of behavior. And then, of course, if Russia responds in kind, it's immediately accused, and the information is spread all over the media, mainstream media, and a lot of other media. It's not only mainstream media now, as we all know. And it's mirroring again the intentions of the West. You can actually read in all the accusations that are done to Russia. You can read all the intentions. When I say the West, I say US and its vassal states, because they are vassal states. I mean, we could argue that it's an alliance that declaredly wants to finish off Russia, wants to bring Russia to his knees as it was after the Soviet Union, so it can exploit his cheaply his resources, and so on and so on. And this one could even be admitted, okay, we want that, we're going to invade, like in the old times, right? Territory to conquer. But this is not so, right? This is not so. This is not an alliance that is together to benefit from conquest. Because what we see is that only the US is benefiting from all this mess. And it's not even the US citizens. It's only it's only a narrow layer of the society, of the US society. The top layer of the US society that benefits from this. Because if I remind you, the US has the biggest prison population, has a huge a huge quantity of people living on the streets. I mean, all sorts of problems. It's a jungle society with heading to extreme inequality. The ones who do good, they can have a decent life. The others who don't manage, even if they work, they have a pretty shitty life. And a lot of them are forced to go to the army, where they can have better conditions. So, but it's not an example. And the US has prisons, jails, prisons all over the world, bases all over the world, prisons where they exercise torture. I mean, Guantanamo being the most famous. But, I mean, none of this. A lot of this is known, but a lot of this is not repeated enough. It's actually seldom repeated. But if one takes a little bit of time, looks at the facts, looks at the history, just for example, Google the list of countries that the US has been at war with, you'll find a nice track record. List of countries whose governments the US has overthrown, list of dictatorships that the US supports, and so on, and so on. It's the age of the US colonialism, and because Russia and China and some other countries are now standing up to it, you have all this narrative, all this demonization. There are dictatorships, no freedom, we have to fight them and defeat them. La 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 la. So yeah. So tonight was one more step for escalation. Of course, Russia will respond now. Who will suffer? The US? No. You guessed it. Ukrainian citizens. They will the ones who suffer. yeah, I think that's all I had to say for now. I have to hit the bed after the night shift. I hope I see you on the next one.